The producer handed Natalie Kovacs a check for $18,000 on a Tuesday morning in October, standing in the same barn where Gerald Pittman from First Union Bank had stood 3 months earlier, shaking his head at the peeling paint and crooked doorframe. "This structure is a liability," Gerald had said, tapping his pen against his clipboard. "I can in good conscience approve a loan against a property with a barn in this condition." Now the barn was filled with grip trucks and lighting equipment, transformed into the farmhouse interior for a period drama about Depression-era Kansas. The producer, a sharp-eyed woman named Maya Chan, looked around the space like it was a cathedral. "We'll meet it for another month," Maya said. "Same rate. And we'll restore anything we modify." Natalie took the check with steady hands, the hands that had rebuilt fence posts and delivered breech calves and kept 200 acres running since her father died. The hands Gerald Pittman had looked at like they couldn't possibly understand farm finance. It had started in July, when Natalie needed $12,000 to replace her irrigation system. The aquifer had dropped, the old pump was finished, and without water, her heritage grain operation would fail before autumn. She'd walked into First Union with her tax returns, her yield projections, her carefully maintained books. Gerald had been polite. That was the worst part. Not dismissive or cruel, just gently doubtful, the way you talk to someone pursuing a doomed hobby. "Your revenue model is unconventional," Heath said, reviewing her paperwork. "Heritage grains, direct-to-consumer sales, farmers market distribution. It's not what we typically see succeed in this market. I've been profitable for 3 years. Modest profit. On a single-operator farm. The risk assessment isn't favorable." They'd walked the property after that. Gerald had insisted. Her farmhouse was solid, 1890s stone foundation, new roof she'd put on herself 2 summers back. The fields were clean, the equipment maintained. Then they'd reached the barn. It was the oldest structure on the property, built in 1847 according to the deed records. Post and beam construction, hand-hewn timbers, vertical plank siding that had weathered to silvery gray. The door hummed slightly crooked, paint peeled in long strips. One window had a cracked spiderwebbing across old glass. "This is a hazard," Gerald had said. "If this collapsed, your insurance wouldn't cover it. The whole property value is compromised. The barn is structurally sound. Those timbers are 12-inch oak. My grandfather's engineer friend assessed it 5 years ago. Miss Kovacs, I'm trying to help you see the reality. This property needs significant investment before it can secure serious financing. The barn alone would cost $40,000 to restore properly, or $20,000 to tear down and rebuild. I don't want to tear it down. That's your choice. But I can't approve this loan." Natalie had driven home in silence. At the feed store the next day, Bill Morrison had asked how it went with the bank. Word traveled. By the weekend, half the county knew Gerald Pittman had turned down Natalie Kovacs because her barn was falling apart. Should have just taken the land loan from AG Credit. Her cousin Martin had said at Sunday dinner. They don't care about cosmetics. They wanted the farm as collateral. Everything. That's how loans work, Nat. Not if I can help it. She'd spent the next week studying her options. Grants, nothing available. Private lenders, the rates were predatory. Credit cards, financial suicide. She walked the barn every evening, running her hands over the solid timbers, the careful joinery, the craftsmanship that had outlasted everyone who'd built it. Her grandmother used to say that old things survive for a reason. They'd been made right the first time. The idea came from an unexpected source. Natalie was at the farmer's market in August when a customer, a costume designer named Philip from Cincinnati, mentioned he was scouting locations for a film shooting in the region. "They're looking for authentic agricultural buildings," Heath said. "Pre-1950s if possible. Everything around here is either demolished or covered in aluminum siding." Natalie had sold him 6 pounds of ancient grains flour and thought nothing of it. Then she'd gone home and looked at her barn differently. The research took 3 days. Location scouting companies. Film production tax incentives in neighboring states that made Ohio attractive for period pieces. Rental rate comparables for agricultural structures. The numbers were staggering. Production companies paid premium rates for authentic locations, especially ones that didn't require extensive modification. She'd photographed the barn from every angle, documented the interior, compiled the historical records, put together a location portfolio like she was selling seed stock, professional, thorough, honest about the structure's condition but clear about its authenticity. The posting went up on 3 location scouting websites. 1847 Post and Beam Barn, original condition, available for film/photo production. Gerald Pittman called 2 weeks later. Ms. Kovacs, I wanted to check in. Have you reconsidered the agricultural loan through AG Credit? I'm exploring alternatives. The irrigation situation is time-sensitive. I'd hate to see you lose the season because of pride. She'd hung up carefully, not slammed, just ended the conversation with the same quiet finality she used to close a gate. The first inquiry came in September. A small production company shooting a documentary about sustainable farming. They'd rented the barn for 3 days, paid $2,000, treated the space like it was sacred. The director had actually cried when she saw the original ladder to the hayloft. Then Maya Chen's production company had called. The film was called Dust, a period piece about a widow holding her farm together during the 1930s. Maya had walked through Natalie's barn like she was discovering archaeology. "This is perfect," she'd said, running her hand along the beam. "You can't fake this patina. You can't build this pattern. Do you know what production designers charge to make new would look this authentically old? I didn't know that was a thing. It's an entire department. And it never looks quite right. This," she gestured around the space. "This is real. We need it." The contract had been straightforward. $6,000 per week for use of the barn and surrounding property. Minimum 3 weeks, option for extension. Production would provide liability insurance, restore any modifications, and give Natalie final approval on all changes. Martin had been skeptical when she told him. $6,000 a week to use a barn, Gerald Pittman said, was worthless. He said it was a liability. He was wrong. You're going to let Hollywood people crawl all over the property? I'm going to make more in a month than Gerald would have loaned me in total. Without debt. Without putting the farm up as collateral. The shoot started the first week of October. Natalie had watched the production transform her barn into a Depression-era farmhouse interior. Period-accurate furniture, dust effects, carefully controlled lighting that made the space look exactly like what it was. A place where people had worked and lived and survived. The crew treated her property with unexpected reverence. The set designer asked permission before hanging anything. The director consulted Natalie on historical accuracy. What would a Kansas farmer in 1934 have stored in a barn? How would the light fall during harvest season? You actually know this stuff, Maya had said. Most location owners just hand us keys and disappear. It's my family's history. My great-grandmother lived through the Depression. Right here. Would you be willing to consult? We pay your day rate. Natalie had become an unofficial historical consultant at $200 per day. She'd explained how women managed farms when men left for work programs, demonstrated how to properly stack grain sacks, corrected the way an actress held a pitchfork. On the 3rd week of shooting, Gerald Pittman drove by. Natalie was walking 2 of the actors through proper livestock handling when his car slowed on the road. He didn't stop, just stared at the production trucks, the equipment, the professional bustle of a film set operating on her supposedly worthless property. Bill Morrison mentioned it at the feed store. Gerald asked me what was happening at your place. Seemed confused. He say anything else? Asked if you'd sold to a production company. I told him you were too smart to sell. You rented instead. The word spread differently this time. Not pity or doubt, but curiosity. How much did they pay? Would they come back? Were other productions looking? Natalie fielded calls from 3 neighboring farmers within a week. You think my barn would work for this kind of thing? They wanted advice, connections, a piece of what she'd figured out. She helped them. Photographed their structures, showed them how to present historical documentation, connected them with location scouts. If the county was going to benefit from what she'd learned, she wouldn't hoard it. The irrigation system went in during the shoot's 4th week. State-of-the-art pump, efficient distribution, paid for entirely with rental income. Natalie watched the installation while Maya filmed a scene in the barn, the main character defending her farm against a banker trying to foreclose. The irony wasn't lost on her. Maya wrapped production on Halloween. The crew struck the set, restored the barn to its original condition, left it cleaner than they'd found it. The final check brought Natalie's total earnings to $24,000. We'll credit you as historical consultant, Maya said. And I'm recommending this location to every period. Production, I know. You want to get more calls. The barn can handle it. Gerald Pittman's an idiot. Natalie smiled. He's a banker. He sees risk. I see possibility. After the crew left, Natalie walked the barn in the late afternoon quiet. The timbers still stood solid. The old glass still caught the light. Nothing fundamental had changed, but everything had shifted. This space that Gerald had dismissed as a liability had just financed her farm's infrastructure for the next 5 years. She was locking up when a car pulled into the driveway. Gerald Pittman, alone, without his clipboard. "Miss Kovacs, do you have a moment?" She waited. "I wanted to," he stopped. Started again. "I saw the production. Bill mentioned what you've been doing. Renting my barn. The one you said was a hazard." His neck colored. "I was assessing traditional collateral value. For a conventional agricultural loan. You were seeing what you expected to see, not what was actually there." "That's fair." He looked at the barn. Really looked, maybe for the first time. "I underestimated the property's potential. And her business acumen." "Yes, you did. The bank is developing a new loan program. Small business innovation in agriculture. I thought you might be interested. I'm not taking on debt right now, Gerald. But thank you. Of course. I wanted you to know the door is open." After he left, Natalie stood in the driveway as the sun dropped behind the tree line. The door had always been open. She'd just found a better one. By spring, Natalie had rented the barn to 4 different productions: a commercial for Heritage Seed Company, a photo shoot for a farm equipment catalog, another period film, and a documentary about rural architecture. Her location fee had increased to $8,000 per week based on demand and her growing reputation for historical accuracy. The irrigation system transformed her yields. The heritage grains came in strong: 42 acres of turkey red wheat, 18 acres of bloody butcher corn, 6 acres of experimental einkorn. Her direct-to-consumer sales doubled as restaurants discovered her specialty flours. She hired her neighbor's daughter, Emma, part-time for harvest and market days. In May, Maya's film premiered at a regional festival. Natalie attended at Maya's insistence, sat in the dark theater watching her barn transformed into cinematic art. The credits listed her as historical consultant and thanked Kovacs Heritage Farm for the use of their irreplaceable 1847 bar. Irreplaceable, the word Gerald Pittman had never thought to use. The festival screening brought new attention. A location scout from a major streaming series called about a multi-season rental agreement. An architectural magazine wanted to feature the barn in a piece about preserving agricultural structures. A university researcher asked to study the building techniques for a preservation methods course. Natalie negotiated carefully. The streaming series would pay $35,000 for a 12-week season, renewable annually. She'd retain control over modifications and scheduling. They provide structural insurance and maintenance as part of the contract. "You're building an empire off a barn," Gerald said was worthless, Martin said at Sunday dinner. He meant it as a compliment this time. "I'm building sustainability. There's a difference. You could buy new equipment, expand the acreage, or I could keep doing what works. Grow what I know, rent what others need." The streaming series started production in June. They built an entire farmstead around her barn. Period-accurate outbuildings, carefully maintained gardens, working equipment from the 1920s. Natalie consulted on everything. Her day rate now $400. She taught the lead actress how to properly gather eggs, correct a horse's lead, read soil quality by touch. Between filming sessions, she ran her farm. The work continued: planting, irrigating, harvesting, selling. The barn served double duty now, sometimes a film set, sometimes storage for grain. The old building adapted like it had been adapting for 176 years. Gerald Pittman came by in August. Not for business this time. He stood in the driveway, watching the production crew work, his expression unreadable. "Miss Kovacs, I owe you an apology. You gave me one. Last fall. A real one. I looked at your barn and saw decay. You looked at it and saw opportunity. That's the difference between managing risk and creating value." Natalie wiped her hands on her work pants. "Gerald, you were doing your job. The bank has rules. I understand that. The rules don't account for vision. I should have. Maybe." She looked at her barn, at the crew carefully lighting a scene inside, at the structure that kept proving its worth in ways no spreadsheet could predict. Or maybe some things can't be measured the conventional way. Maybe that's not a failure of the asset. It's a limitation of the measuring tool. He nodded slowly. "I'd like to bring my daughter by sometime. She's studying business. I think she could learn from what you've built here. Anytime. After he left, Natalie returned to work. Emma was in the south field, checking the corn. The camera crew was setting up for a sunset scene. Her phone held 3 new messages from location scouts. The day moved forward with the steady rhythm of work that mattered. That evening, after the crew wrapped and Emma went home and the farm settled into quiet, Natalie walked the barn one last time. She ran her hands over the timbers her great-great-grandfather had raised, felt the solid permanence of craftsmanship that had outlasted everyone who doubted its worth. The barn had always been valuable. She'd just been the first person in 3 generations to recognize that value existed outside traditional metrics, not in what you could borrow against it, but in what it offered to people who needed authenticity, history, connection to something real. Her phone buzzed. A location scout from a major film studio. They were shooting a Western next year, needed an authentic barn for a pivotal scene. Would she be interested in discussing terms? Natalie smiled and typed her response. Tell me about the project. The work continued. The barn stood. And Natalie Kovacs, with her calloused hands and clear-eyed vision, had proved that sometimes the things others call liabilities are actually assets waiting for someone wise enough to see their true value. The irrigation system hummed in the fields. The heritage grains grew strong. And the barn that Gerald Pittman had dismissed as falling apart generated more income than his loan would have provided. Without debt, without compromise, without putting her family's land at risk. She'd been devastatingly, completely right. But more than that, she'd been patient enough to let the truth reveal itself in the only language that mattered. Results that couldn't be dismissed, income that couldn't be denied, value that had been there all along, waiting for someone to look past the peeling paint and see what was really standing in front of them.